change. Don't go out on an island. Live? Thank you, everybody. I'm sort of pinch hitting for the chair who couldn't make it. So let's call the meeting to order for Human Resources Committee meeting Tuesday, June 6, 2023, 12 p.m. We call the meeting to order. Any of the conflicts of interest? No. See none. Approval of the agenda. Moved by Mayor Brown.
Yeah, I'll second that. I don't think we're going to get through it all.
Okay,
I don't know what to do, so.
yeah. Adoption of the minutes, April 4th, 2023. Moved by Mayor Brown, second by Councilor Bernard. Any business arising from those minutes? If we see none, let's get right into the reports. HR amendment to staffing bylaw. Who has that one? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The first report pertaining to the proposed amendment of staffing bylaw number 2018-20 to align with the Municipal Government Act. The recommendation is the council amend the staffing bylaw number 2018-20 to align with the MGA by replacing section 3.4 with funding for permanent positions shall be approved by council through a budgetary approval process. So some background on this is in accordance with Section 86(2)(c) of the Municipal Government Act, Council has one employee, the Chief Administrative Officer. Section 92(1) prohibits Council or a member of Council from undertaking any duties associated with the CAO. Section 93(1)(d) stipulates that the Chief Administrative Officer is responsible for hiring, directing, managing, and supervising employees of the municipality. Currently, Section 3.4 of the staffing bylaw, number 2018-20, states that approval by council is required to create and fill a permanent position. This is not in alignment with the requirements of the MGA. Through the approval of budget, council approves the funding of staffing positions. This is essentially how positions are created. According to the MGA, filling positions is the responsibility of the CAO. In order to align the staffing bylaw with the Municipal Government Act, the following amendment is being proposed. Replace Section 3.4 with funding for permanent positions shall be approved by council through a budgetary approval process. You'll find attached to your report the current in-force version of the staffing bylaw as well as the proposed amended red line version.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Your Worship.
or did you want to say?
Yeah, no, I want to speak to it. That's why I have a thing on.
Councilor Bernard, go ahead.
Thank you. I kind of have an idea why this possibly might be wanting to change. I don't agree with the change. I think 2018-2 states the approval of council is required. Now, if you want to change it to, what's with the feedback? No, it shouldn't be.
Just stand back. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe it is. So we've, for years, always approved, council would approve any new positions. And whether you want to call it to create and fill, after the council approved it, it was up to the CAO to make sure her staff went and did the proper due diligence to create that position, to approve it. To me, for funding for purposes shall be approved by council through a budgetary approval process, it's taken away council authority to what that position may be. To me, I do a friendly amendment. I go to 2018 and I have approval by council is required for funding to create and fill a permanent position. After we approve that, as I said earlier, it's up to staff and the CAO would be in charge to make sure that the HR is following that order. I'm not sure that I'm going to agree with through a budgetary process and have no say in what that position may be and what that position details. So I would be against that change for that reason. Because I don't think council has never been involved in filling a position, especially a permanent position. It's always gone through the HR process.
Mayor Brown? Or is that it? Council Bernard on that one?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you for your opinions.
Just turn up your mic. Turn up your mic.
Oh, sorry.
So, Emily, if I go to section 93, subsection 1D, as you said, the duties of the chief administrative officer is responsible for hiring, directing, managing, supervising employees of the municipality. So employees would be your staff, like people that work up in HR. But when it comes to managers, I know that any new managerial position had to come through council because it was a budgetary issue. I don't know how this amendment that you're proposing is addressing that, because I think it hides it, it doesn't make it transparent. And we've been pushing for the last 4.5, going on 5 years, openness, transparency, and accountability. And that's what I liked about any new positions would always come to council for approval. So let's say we're looking for 2 managers for planning, then we're adding another manager. Hence, that would have to come back to council to address it or to approve it. Now, if it was a planner, or it was an inspector, a building inspector, that's an employee. That's an employee, like the manager is too, but that employee is a responsibility through the manager of that department and then eventually the CAO. So I am a little concerned about, I think this requires a little more study or a little more discussion on this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're very welcome.
I
you're-
think the other thing I'd like to add too is, and I'll ask the question, but if a position was approved under the budgetary approval process, then that would give the CAO, if I'm interpreting this right, to, like, for example, if we have an approval in the budget for a position now, you can change that
No,
to whatever you want.
that's why I just want to clarify.
What's that?
I just,
Oh, just go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you
CAO.
through the chair. So to answer a couple of questions here, what's being proposed is that council approves of the creation of the position, right? So that's through the budgetary process. That's the transparency piece. So through that budget process, and I said budgetary process because you'll see later on in this agenda, there's some circumstances where we have to come mid-year that we have to ask for different positions. So it's budgetary process, not the annual budgetary process, because sometimes it happens. So essentially, by bringing these positions to council in the budget process, that's when you're signing off the creation of the position. That could be a manager, that could be any sort of technical person. Because remember, in the budgetary process, you had a whole long list of positions, and you're like, this one, this one, this one. That's what's being referred to here. So what's being changed is that once you've approved it at budget, we're not coming back with the job description to bring through HR committee again. So once you've approved it at budget, it's approved, and we go and we fill it and we do what we need to do. So we're not taking that extra step anymore. Because council is responsible for budget, policy, programs, not for actual staffing. So through your budgetary process, that's when you're approving the staffing envelope with anything new that's in there, but you're not getting involved in the details of what's in their job description or when they're getting hired throughout the year. So that's the distinction of what this policy is trying to draw.
I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not sure we got involved with that before anyway. Job descriptions, I mean, that was up to staff. Come up with job description, post that. We never got involved in that.
They were coming back through this committee as far as I understand it.
Any new positions. we
Yes,
want them to
any
come back.
creations of new positions were
Yeah.
coming back through this
So once we
committee.
approve it, that's it.
Yeah.
So that still is the same way as what's written in the NGA now.
The difference would be is throughout the year, you wouldn't be coming, job descriptions wouldn't be coming. In the budget time, it would be a list of the positions that are to be created, and that's what council would be approving on. So there'd be nothing more coming through the HR committee in terms of job descriptions or what they're doing.
But I
in
don't
the
think there is
municipality.
now. Once we approve a position to be filled, and staff goes and does the due diligence. If you want a new position that's not in the budget, it comes here.
well, you'd be asking, that's the same thing. So you'd be asking for funding again if we wanted to create a new position, and that's what would be coming through. But my understanding is at this committee, before, whether this has been active for the whole time as process, what's been going on is before we actually go to hire, they're coming back with these positions for almost like a reapproval of the position before it
I think-
actually
no.
gets advertised.
No, what we've asked for in the past was any new position would come here, not just go post it. We wanted to know what was being posted. A new position would need council approval, so we wanted it to come here first. That's what we asked to be changed. And once
So-
it's approved, it follows.
So I guess for my clarification, when you say a new position, this is a position outside of what's already approved at the budget? Or is this,
Any new position that hasn't been approved by council comes here. That's what we've asked for.
So even if we had the budget?
okay, so I just want to walk through, I want to make sure I'm perfectly clear on what's going on here.
What about that?
So if I, in the budget process, I proposed a new manager of, I don't know, IT.
Whatever.
So in the budget process, you said, yes, we're funding the manager of IT.
Yeah.
Do you have an expectation that I will come back and talk to you about the manager of IT before I hire that position?
We've already approved it, so there's no sense in coming back.
Okay.
But after that budget's approval's done, let's say after the budget's done, you come in June or July and say, I'd like a manager of typewriter maintenance.
And they need
comes here.
funding, yes,
Yeah.
it would come through here. So that's all this bylaw change is actually doing. I think we're speaking the same language
Yeah,
here.
So if we are, then it doesn't need to be changed. It can stay the way it is.
Except the problem is with the way it's worded right now, is it does make it sound that all the positions need to come back here for approval.
No, section 3.4, approval by council is required to create and fill a new
fill.
permanent position.
That's the fill. It's the fill part that's
We're
problematic.
saying, so when we approve it, we're approving the creation of that position and for you to fill that position.
Yes.
Yeah.
But and that's what's confusing about the language in there, because it makes it sound like I need to come back for approval to fill, versus the new proposed is saying that all positions will be created through that budgetary process.
Right.
There's no question
But
left.
CAO Eleanor, is that when you do the budgetary process, we look at the new positions, we discuss those new positions, and we approve them, right? But if you want to hire an additional manager of planning that's not in the budget, that has to come back, not to it says right there, approval by council. So the council has to approve it, is required to create and fill a new that's a new position, that second manager for planning. That wasn't in the budgetary approval. So that has to come back here.
And then go to council, yeah.
I would leave it as is.
And
That's-
so would I. I would do that too. Anyway, I'll move it. Is that wrong? Leave it as is.
Are you okay, CAO?
So I just want to be, you're
Yeah.
moving this, because it's just a clarity factor is all this is coming down to.
Yeah.
I think the bottom line is that if we budget for certain positions and then beyond that you want, or the city corporation wants a new person on top of that, I think is what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just trying to grasp it all through. Yeah, you go ahead, Councilor Barrett.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things, and one, you're right. I don't think that I don't think this is changing anything. I think when council approves a new position in the budget, then that's you created and you've given them authority to fill it. I think our issue is if there's a new position outside the budget that we feel we need, then it comes back to here as what we asked for, and it has been come back to here. So nothing's really changed. Other than clarity that, once we approve a position in the budget, does that need to come back here again for reapproval? No, it doesn't. So, and that's why, to me, I would leave it as is.
Okay, so where do we go from here? Your worship?
Yeah.
CAO, Eleanor, if, you know, you could compromise by saying funding for permanent positions shall be approved by council through a budgetary approval process, but to create and fill a new permanent position must be approved by council. I'm just trying to keep it simple. I think the process that's in place right now addresses it. I don't think we're changing much by rewording it. The wording is fine the way it is. Because a budgetary process, if we add new positions during the budgetary process, it comes back to this body right here, the City Council of Charlottetown, they approve it. Then, after the budget's approved, we have to create another new position, it has to come back here to be approved. So it's still being done. I think it looks like every new position, whether it's through the budgetary process or through outside the budgetary process, has to be approved by council in order to create and fill a new permanent position. To me, when I saw this, I thought, we're really not clarifying anything. I think the clarity is already there with 3.4.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the chair, the issue is, it's the fill part. The fill implies hiring. That's where the wording issue is. So anyway, I think we're saying the same thing here. The attempt to revise or update was simply to say it's the same thing, that it will come through, but there's no implication that council has a role in filling positions, hiring positions, and that's all that was trying to be put forward here. Thanks.
Okay. To me, I don't think it's created a problem before, and I'd leave it. I find that sometimes we change wording of things, then implications change to what your expectations were. And I don't want to run that risk. So create and fill would be telling the CAO, you have authority to create and fill that position. I mean, where would council ever get involved in filling a position, permanent nature? Never mind, you've been here too long.
Don't go there.
No, seriously though.
Don't get.
I do have a question though on page 7. Although the dates in this first reading and second reading, the amendment summary in the very first column on page 7. Amend to limit terms of employment 3 terms for casual employees except crossing guards, and to remove the ability of elected officials to submit a letter of reference for persons seeking employment with the city. Is that? I wonder. Yeah, that's to say the dates look like November 97 and February 98 was third reading. I think you're looking to change 5.4. Make sense?
Thank you, and through the chair, what you've highlighted quite plainly is I think it might be time just to create a new policy and get rid of all these old amendments out of there. They're kind of confusing.
Yeah, so what's being asked there? Just the casual employees are limited to a maximum of 3 terms of casual employment subject to satisfactory performance appraisal?
That's the current policy, right?
Well, I
That's what they
think
want to
the-
change.
Well,
Go
Is
ahead.
that what it is?
The only request for amendment we had was section 3.4 of the staffing bylaw.
Right.
That's an old amendment, yeah.
okay. So there's nothing more within this that you wanted, that you're looking to say, okay,
No.
okay. Okay, thank you.
So what I'm trying to wrap my head around is that we're going to leave HR amendment to staffing bylaw the way it was?
Yeah,
Moved by Council Bernard.
yeah,
Seconded by Your Worship, Mayor Philip Brown for Charlottetown.
okay.
Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, for clarity. Then this is your recommendation to council? Because it's a committee, so a deciding factor would be for it to go through council. So that would be the recommendation out of this committee to council regarding the bylaw.
Personally, it doesn't matter to me, but I don't think it does have to go to council, no. I think this is a request that the administration's made, and this committee has said no. We're not looking to change it, so it stays as is. A resolution, we're going to make a change. We're recommending not change anything. I noticed, Sue, you're shaking your head. Every little question that comes through every committee doesn't go to a resolution to council to vote on. So if we were asking for a change here, then I would think we'd have to go to council. We're not asking for a change.
Sue Fraser, just so everyone knows who you are.
Use this one.
In fairness to our brand-new CAO, I think we have to recognize that when this kind of recommendation comes forward, which is in essence to make an amendment to a bylaw, that this is a recommending body. So even though it's really just a friendly amendment, I still think it needs to be properly vetted through to council, because as a recommending body, you can't necessarily make a decision and just hold it up at this level. It needs to be properly vetted back through council as a whole.
Even if you're not making a change? Like, I can understand that when you're making changes, and that's always what went forward. But if you're not making a change, I don't recall going to council to say, we'd like to leave it as is.
That's a valid point, Councillor, through to the chair, to Councillor Bernard. It's a valid point that you're recommending that there not be any change, but there is a recommendation on the floor that there should be change. So even though you're recommending maintaining status quo, I still think it needs to move forward. It's not just an administrative item, it's a recommended amendment to a bylaw to add clarity to the role of council with respect to filling new positions, which is a pretty significant thing.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
this has come up before, that some councillors have stated that, okay, a recommendation was turned down, whether it's approved to recommend to council or to reject to the recommendation, it still has to go to council for approval to say yay or nay to it. No, that's correct. That's procedural bylaw. Okay?
Just on that, would that not confuse some of the people in the chamber next week and saying, well, I mean, what's the story with this?
I think the CAO will explain it, because
I mean, things haven't changed, so why, why it's on the floor? As a layman, that's all I'm trying.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, this recommendation was being made in order to make sure the wording of our bylaw aligns with the Municipal Government Act. The challenge is, this might be our understanding today, but where we want all our bylaws to be is anybody could pick up the bylaw and have an understanding of what the actual rule is versus what practice is. So by clarifying the wording, anybody could pick it up and say, any new positions has to go through the budgetary process. That's where they get approved, essentially. So that's all the change was looking for, and I can also explain that to council as well.
But, Mr. Chair, again, to clarify, we've done this in the past. Councillor Bernard has been here since 2000. We've done this in the past where new positions came to council during the budgetary process. As soon as they were approved, they didn't come back to council. But when you approve, if you forward a new position, and I keep using two instead of one manager for planning, that second manager of planning has to come back to this council to approve it, because it's outside of the budgetary process. So I can see, CAO Eleanor Mohammed, that you have difficulty with to create and fill. There must be a word that we could, I was just looking through my thorses to see if I could find something that would be comparable to fill, because that's the word that I think that's holding you up. But for us, it's, and when I say us, I'm talking about mayor and council, the two offices, is that it's just, I know that some jurisdictions don't do it like this, but this is the city of Charlottetown, and this is the culture that we have both politically, socially, and this is what our makeup is. So I will be glad to discuss it or see it on the agenda for the next council meeting.
So do we move to make an amendment, or what are we going to do at this part?
Well, thank you, Chair. You moved to make a recommendation
Right.
not to change it. And
Okay,
that would be
excellent.
what your recommendation
Yeah.
would be to council.
Excellent, thank you. Okay,
And
go ahead, Councilman.
yeah, not to belabor that, I do think, I thinking of the wording before and create and take out the filling, but I've always looked at it as we are given permission to create the position. We're also given permission to fill that position. So, anyway,
Okay, thank you for that. B, KPMG report and structure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
CAO.
Yep. So the purpose of this report is to update council on the recently completed City of Charlottetown Governance Review, the final report, and to introduce a new senior leadership structure for the corporation. It's also to request funding for a new manager of governance and legislative services. So back in October 11th, 2022, council approved the award of the governance review request for the proposal to KPMG. The final KPMG report that received, I feel like the name governance review is not quite appropriate to what this actual report is. A governance review would include council committees, and interactions with the operations or the corporation. What's come back instead is more of an employee structural review, which is less of a council document and more of an operational document. So what this report essentially does is make recommendations regarding staffing headcounts, different structure in terms of manager, directors, and who to bring in the future. So based on that review and staff feedback, what's being proposed for a new senior leadership team is three directors, two of which have been funded as part of the last. One was approved out of the last budget process, and there was also a previously approved deputy CAO position. So the first director would be a director of finance and corporate services, and this essentially would be the city's chief financial officer, and is also responsible for all the corporate functions, including governance, legislation, accounting, information technology, communications, and engagement.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Councilman Hurst, sorry, CAO.
I just wanted clarity. Eleanor, excuse me. I thought that we were talking about, I'm pretty sure, instead of a DCAO, we were looking to hire one or two directors, not both. It was the funding for the DCAO, we were going to move that into a director position or two director positions. I don't believe it was both.
Thank you through the
Or all
chair.
three.
So we are funded for a deputy CAO position, and then a second director position was already funded in budget. So there's two positions already there, approved in budget. So it wasn't taking one and turning it into the other. It was one was funded, and then a second one was funded.
For directors.
Yeah, well, a deputy CAO was already funded, so that is a position that was already there. And then this last budget was a new director position. So we have two positions there.
Okay. So, because I thought the discussions I was involved in was we were not going to be hiring another deputy CAO. We were going to be hiring directors.
That's correct. So there's no intention here to hire another deputy CAO. What's being proposed is three director positions.
Okay.
Two of which now are funded. So as part of this report, I'm asking for funding for a third. But we have contract money right now. The third is actually Sue Fraser, who's been on contract as a director. So she would be the third one until we have permanent funding in place. But the first two that I'm talking about, the Director of Finance and Corporate Services and the Director of Integrated Growth, are the funded positions. So we can actually hire those this year.
So what, if I get this right, you get your two positions that are funded through the budget this year, and you don't have funding for the contract position once it expires. And that's what you're asking for.
I have, yes, so I have current funding for the contract, but I'm looking for permanent funding for that third director. And I'm proposing that it be secured for 24-25. So I'm not asking for that funding just yet. I'm looking for a placeholder that it will be funded as part of that budget so we can start the hiring process in time for when Sue Fraser's contract finishes as the director, which will be in time for the next budget.
So if you have the funding in the budget for the DCAO, can you not use that funds?
So what I'm proposing is, I'll be explicit here, so I'm going to use the deputy CAO funding for the Director of Finance and Corporate Services. I'm using the funding from the Director,
Okay, that's what I was asking.
yeah,
That's what I was asking. So-
Okay.
So you use it, yeah. Okay, so it's not separate money that was approved in the budget for the
No.
2 directors plus DCAO funding.
right, so to be clear, I'm not asking for for 2 of the directors, I'm only asking for 1 director as part of this report, because I already have funding for the other 2.
And you're using the funding for the other 2, at least one of them, from the DCAO salary, and partly fund the second one.
Yes.
Yes,
Well,
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
DCO funding will now be used for Finance and Corporate Services Director, and then funding for the director position that was just approved in the budget would be for the Director of Integrated Growth.
Right, okay, that's what I was looking to clarify. So it's not 3 salaries that were approved in the budget. It was the DCAO one. 2 director positions were approved, but you're using the funding from the DCAO to pay for them.
Yes,
Yes, okay.
correct. So the scope of the Director of Integrated Growth, they'll be responsible for the growth of our city. So for land use, municipal engineering and infrastructure, corporate real estate, and economic development. And then the Director of Community Services, and this is the one that we're requesting to be funded as a permanent position, will be responsible for customer service excellence and visitor experience through public works, parks and recreation, water and sewer, arts, culture, and tourism. So the functions that are going to be under these positions, at this point, we're kind of trying to take a nimble approach. Some of the different functions might be moved around based on our different needs, but these will be the general themes of categories of what these directors will be responsible for. So with the creation of these 3 directors, there'll be a new senior leadership team, which will include the 3 directors, but then also the chief of fire and the chief of police. So these 5 positions will be the key communications contact for council to be working through for administration. And then there's another position that's being actually requested to be funded here midway through the year. And this position is quite a necessary position from my perspective. And this is the Manager of Governance and Legislative Services. So as explained in the report here, we keep finding ourselves tripping over a number of governance items that I believe this position will really help support us in. So whether it's a clear terms of reference or even the discussion we had here today of whether something needs to go through council or not, or we had questions earlier today, like if a chair can't show up, then what can we actually do? This is the type of position that gets these details in place for us and provides the information so it's easy for us to operate. This position is the same type of position that you'll find in most of the other capital cities. They either can be called managers of governance and legislation, or they're called a city clerk, and they have a city clerk's office. They're essentially responsible for all things governance. Also included could be intergovernmental relations. We would include strategic projects, overseeing the filing system and document control for the city, which is something that we greatly need to build up. They would be responsible for the team that would lead the drafting of bylaws and supporting other departments, but then also supporting council. So when council or an elected official has something that they need to bring to a council meeting, this would be the person that would help prepare the report with them and any recommendations or resolutions. They'd also be the person who would lead in helping staff, but also council with Robert's Rules of Parliamentary Procedure, and implementation of all relevant legislation. They'd also be involved with auditing all our bylaws to ensure that we're aligned with the Municipal Government Act and that all those bylaws are speaking to each other. So when one department makes a change, to make sure that we're looking at the cascading effect over other departments in terms of our legislation. And then this manager would be responsible for all the existing staff that currently support the mayor, freedom of information and protection of privacy, staff responsible for that. And they would also be responsible for all the administrative assistants who are responsible for creating all these different agendas for these committees, which is quite a large piece of work. And then ensuring that there's better alignment and more strategy into our council agendas. So this would be quite an important position.
Okay.
So ultimately,
Sorry. Just going back to the Director of Finance one, we have a finance manager now.
Right.
And when I'm reading through the report too, and are we sort of double dipping, like, so she or he, whoever's in that position, do they gonna go back to this director now, or vice versa? It's, sometimes you read some of the things and say, well, like, we're sort of getting top heavy here. If we add on 3 more directors and we add on another person along the line and all that, and then, like, I don't know, that's what I'm trying to figure out is, like, does it take the power away from the manager of, I'm just using finance for example. Does it take the power away from them that it falls on the other desk of this director? Or in Parks and Recreation, if you had someone looking after that, or, you know, our managers are supposed to manage, and they look after their people. And I'm still worried, and I keep using the old saying that you gotta run you gotta run City Hall like you run your house as a budget. And I'm afraid that, like, you can't have too many bosses, because it just won't work, and that's just my personal opinion, but, you know, we gotta stay within our means too, and, like, there's only 2 avenues of revenue, and that's, I'm going to cut service or raise taxes. And if we keep adding on, then all of a sudden, you have an awful lot of upper management around, and, you know, is the staff going to do the work? I mean, the staff does the work. There's no answers. That's just my personal opinion. I just hope we're not getting too top-heavy. That's all I'm saying. Okay, thank you.
thank you, Chair. Can I?
Yes?
Yeah. So I just want to say, I want to describe the current situation right now. So best practice in terms of span of control and communication, at most in leadership positions, so we're talking directors, CAO, at most you should have 7 to 8 direct reports. Once you get over that number, you lose communication and you lose the ability to mentor and to coach your staff and to be able to have adequate time with them. So the current reality for me as the CAO is I have 15 direct reports, from senior staff all the way down to coordinators. And if I didn't have Director Sue Fraser on staff, that number would be 22. In addition to that, I have all of the planning department reporting to me because there's no manager. So it's highly unusual that a CAO would be interviewing planners to join a municipality. There usually would be another level of a manager or a director in between the CAO. But the organization is so flat right now, we don't have any resilience built into us. So I couldn't ask another manager to cover over planning of what was going on there. If I had a director, that director would be able to handle this with a little bit more resilience than having your CAO have to run a whole department. So that's the challenge that we find ourselves in. So the reason why I had to divide us into 3 directors instead of 2 directors or a deputy is if I say I only bring in 2 directors, then all I'm doing is passing my 15 direct reports down to someone else who then will have an untenable number of direct reports. So setting up into 3 directors gets us a span of control of 7 to 8 for each director. The intention is to be able to give them enough space and time that they can coach and mentor and build resilience into this organization. If I don't have a manager of governance and legislative services, that's 5 additional reports that will be reporting to the Director of Finance and Corporate Services, in addition to the other managers that I'm categorizing under that area. So that's really the rationale of how this has all been set up. The other piece of this is exactly what you were saying. Managers are responsible for managing people. They're involved in day-to-day operations in terms of dealing with complaints, coming up with solutions on the spot. They're more subject matter experts. Bringing in the directors, the director level are the more strategic folks. So they have their eye on the horizon. They're watching what's going on with council. They're watching what's going on with the community. They're able to capture these things ahead of time and then have their different managers work on it accordingly, so we're the head of the ball instead of behind the ball. And the challenge I've found since coming in here is our current structure is continually letting us down in terms of trying to get in front of the ball. So really what this is trying to bring in is a lot more strategy based on best practices, Harvard Business Review, 7 to 8 span of control for senior leaders, is really just to bring a lot more resilience into this organization and to provide the support that all staff need. Thank you.
And I thank you for that. Like I wasn't sort of suggesting that we don't hire them. I was just trying to get a grasp of the whole corporation and how A is supposed to work with A and B was supposed to work with B, for example. Your worship,
Yes.
go right ahead.
Mr. Chair, we all remember why we approved the motion to go with a governance review, because of what took place over the last several years. And as Councillor Bernard would remember, we had many discussions in this room at HR about the structure because it wasn't working. And that's why Councillor Bernard and I disagreed on a couple of things, one being that leave with the DCAO, he was talking about 2 directors. I am firmly behind 2 directors. And I know when I was brought onto council in 2004, the mayor at the time did reorganize the senior team. He had a director of finance, director of corporate services, and a director of community service. So we had 3 directors back then. Was there another one? And was that a director position? Yeah. And so, but if I look at the governance review by KBMG, now KBMG is an international human resources consulting firm. They have tentacles all over this world where they can look at best practices. Their recommendation is the Office of the CAO, a Director of Corporate Services, a Director of Community Services, and then break down those responsibilities. You're adding a third one, which is Director of Integrated Services, and then you also want to add a Manager of Governance and Legislative Services. Now, again, we have to remember what has changed this chamber significantly is that camera right up there. That live stream is the world's eye on what's going on here. I've talked to some committee members on some of our boards. They don't like to talk too much because everything they're saying is being recorded. So this is the new world we're in. And we've been experiencing a lot of growth pains with being more public in what we say and our actions represented in this chamber. And as you know, Councillor Bernard, before you know it, we will have a fully recorded with camera, live stream camera in the Parkdale room, so we can have our committee meetings not always in here, but in there, but live stream. Then you add FOIP onto that, and FOIP adds a whole other layer, right? And I think the 2 coordinators that we have working with the FOIP file are doing a great job considering all the requests that are coming in. I know we've been questioned about some of our practices in the past, and that's coming up this afternoon in another standing committee meeting. But you know what? It's been a learning curve for all of us. I know in Alberta, they've been through FOIP. They've encountered all these open meeting practices. but we're learning and we're getting better at it. And I know we will get much better at it. I'm always, and again, agreeing with the chair, I'm not a top-heavy person when it comes to administration. I look at organizations that are lean, that can, really work together collaboratively. And I believe you stated here in your creation of a new senior leadership team. That new senior leadership team, if it includes 3 with this integrated director of integrated services, I think that person could also be responsible for overseeing governance and legislative issues. Because when you go out to a call for these directorships, you're definitely going to be asking for, these roles, these skill sets. But, Mr. Chair, we have this is the end of, we're almost at the end of our first quarter. By the end of this month, that'll be our first quarter. I would like to see, CAO Eleanor, that we go out as soon as possible to hire those 2 directors, to get those directors in place, a director of community services and director of corporate services, so that we can get moving on. And yes, we do have Sue Fraser as interim director of everything, but I know she's doing a great job, and I know that you would like to keep her on. That's because that's already in the budget. My understanding that her role is already in the budget. So if I can ask, Mr. Chair, let's fill those 2 director positions. Let's take some of the weight off of our CAO, so that our CAO can start working on the priorities for this city. And I know there are many. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Your Worship. And we all know, CAO, that your plate is full. From our past CAOs and everything, it's too much for one person. And we understand all that, so I'm in favor of the whole thing too, as the mayor just mentioned. Councilor Bernard, are you in favor of all that one? Or you have a
Well,
question?
Yeah, a couple of comments, I guess, too. I think, Eleanor, you and I spoke a little bit about this when we had our one-on-one. So understand that the CAO has quite a workload underneath her as the previous one. I think that's why we agreed to hire 2 more directors. I'm always a little bit concerned about the budget at the end of the day, and I know one of the recommendations here was to take one of the manager's position out of the extraordinary expenses, which is a little scary for me, to be honest with you, to take it out of extraordinary. There's a demand out there for up to 10 more police officers. We're looking at hiring more firefighters. We looked at what the budget surplus was. Wasn't real big. We have some monies possibly have to be paid back to the province. I'm not interested in raising taxes. So I kind of like to do it slowly. The 2 directors is what I agreed to. We would move off to the new directors, and then we'll see from there how that's working out before we start making commitments to add more. And there may be an argument to add more. Personally, I don't want to see us pile on a whole bunch right now. As you said before, managers manage, and I think they're doing a great job. I mean, the city of Charlottetown is well regarded as a to me, it's a well-run city, but I think a lot of the comments you get from a lot of tourists and so on is that the city of Charlottetown is a well-functioning city. Can we do better? Yeah, and that's why we put the money in towards the 2 directors. And can that expand? Well, we'll see. But I mean, I would like to do it, put them in place, see what the responsibility is going to be, see how that works out, and if we still find some gaps, because it really wasn't under the organizational audit that we reviewed or the governance review that we asked for. We did ask for the governance review to do just what it did. We wanted to see how we were with the number of bodies are there. Did we need more bodies, which it identified we did. Some of the contract people to make them full-time, which we did. So to me, I just don't want to go too quick. The 2 directors would be what I'm okay with moving ahead with that. Put it in place, but let's see where that goes. Yeah, and the other thing I mentioned on the extraordinary expenses, that's there for a reason. I don't know when, if I don't want to start dipping in that for salaries. I don't. And then those are commitments that you make into the next budget. So I don't know if these requests have been vetted through finance or not, but I'd certainly like to hear what finance has to say. Because at the end of the day, I know one of the things we will be looking for is more police officers. There is no question. And those salaries are over 100,000 each. So, I mean, if you get 10 police officers, you're over $1 million in salaries right there, and that's not capital dollars, that's operational. Firefighters, depending what we do at the fire station, but there's going to be at least a couple more permanent firefighters. So that's another $300,000. So, I need that stuff flushed out in my mind first before I say, yes, let's move ahead and start hiring more upper management. Thank you.
You're exactly right, and the chief and I were interviewed Friday over this, and one of the questions was, well, when can you bring up, I know it's off the record, or I mean, off the agenda of what I'm talking about here. I'm sorry, I said the wrong word, but anyway, and I said to the reporter, it's going to probably take 3 to 4 years, because if we can hire 2 or 3 a year, well, then we're up to that. But then again, it all depends on our budget. And I'm like you, Councillor Bernard, I like to sort of take baby steps and hire the 2 directors, and that's going to take a little bit of burden off everybody, and then we go from there, because I, for one, will be pushing for new officers, and, because our downtown Inc. wants them, everybody wants them, and of course, there's 10 boards, and everybody wants an officer in their ward. I mean, to sit on the streets and watch the speeding. But at the same time, it's all budgetary, and we got to look at that, but I'm in favor of sort of going ahead with that too. Your worship, go ahead. Oh, Director Sue Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a point of clarification with respect to the comments made earlier about becoming top-heavy. When I left here in 2015, prior to that, we had 3 directors. We had a Director of Human Resources, a Director of Corporate Services, and a Director of Community Services. That was our normal for quite a few years. And since I've returned last September, the growth and the service delivery level of the city of Charlottetown, what it's putting out there with respect to service delivery as a full-service community, has just soared. So I can see at where I'm sitting in a corner office, I can see the amount of work and how that has increased to an unbelievable level. And as someone who has department heads parachuting in daily, in the comment around direct reports, it is really hard to lead the corporation when you've got 10 to 15 direct reports, because you have to support the people that are coming in on the fly with their own files to get out the door and their own schedules, timelines, budget constraints, all of those things. We have to be here to direct those people, have to be available to them every day of the week. And it's really hard to focus on big picture things when that's what you're doing with that many direct reports. So I don't think asking for 3 directors is unusual, and I think it's actually necessary in order to be able to do what we need to do moving forward. And I don't think it's an either or. We all know we need a lot more boots on the ground with respect to other services, including police. All I'm suggesting to you is that you also do need 3 directors. I appreciate the caution and the fact that there are budget considerations, but I also know from being here for 10 months that this is very important and almost urgent to get more people to support the CAO at this point in time, because I'll be going back out the door, and I really would like to see when I do go out the door that the CAO and the council are being properly supported.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just add, it's not just about directing the operations, it's also about looking at what we want to do with policy and procedures. That's the role of the senior leadership team is, okay, how do we get ahead of these issues, the unhoused? How do we get ahead of these issues of not enough affordable housing? How do we get ahead of all the issues that are prevalent for a lot of communities, not just Charlottetown, but prevalent for a lot of communities across this country? We have two positions that are already approved. Director of Corporate Services, Director of Community Services. And I know how hard the staff work up in HR. Just to get those processes going will take some time. I'm just saying, look, I'm in favor of expanding the senior leadership team, but let's get those two roles filled or get them occupied with competent, energetic, with a broad mind personnel that will take this city forward. So that's where I am, Sue. I know what you're saying. As I said, I look at that integrated services director. That could take care of this manager of governance and legislation. Because, again, when you go out to search for a director, you look at the skill sets that you want. But right now, we have two positions that are approved, that were approved in this budget, March 31st. We can move on them and get them out the door. And the sooner the better. I think it'll be a much more efficient organization. But again, I like to look at the senior leadership team as staying outside of the silos, working collaboratively, working cooperatively, and finding consensus. Thank you.
Thank you. We all know how our city is really growing and expanding, and it wasn't that long ago, out by your ward, Councilor Bernard, that we drove out and there's only empty fields. Now that just exploded out there with homes and everything, and our city has grown. Winslow, there's not a whole lot left out there either, and so we need the people. And we're all in agreement, I think, of sort of stepping forward and getting the right things enacted, because the KPMG report states this is what we should be doing, this is what we need, so let's be proactive instead of reactive, I guess is my version of it. So, Councilor Bernard, go ahead.
Yeah, no, listening to Sue, and Sue's got a lot of corporate history. I might be as close as her though, 23 years, so. But anyway, and I don't disagree, and I know, like I said, the last CAO didn't have any directors under him, and I don't know, that was for 6 years, but I knew he was swamped too. And I know we need some help. And that's why, as the mayor said, we approved the two directors. Because the other thing I didn't add was, it's great to put things on paper, but I kind of like, to me, I need to know what that person's going to be doing and what value it is to the city and to the taxpayers. So, and that's probably part of why I want to hire a couple, see how that works out, see what the responsibilities are, and then see if there's any gaps. But when I was reading through this, I know it's not just directors. I see there's managers here too. Manager of Governance and Legislative Services, and I'm trying to wrap my head around what that is. When I read through it, I see like city clerk position, city filing system, document control, drafting bylaws. Do we not have people that do that now?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is actually one of the exact reasons why this position is being proposed. I keep coming across different scenarios in this organization where there needs to be a change made to a bylaw, but there's no staff to make the change to the bylaw. The most recent one I can think of is the unsightly bylaw in terms of a change that needs to be there. The staff that we're looking for to make changes to bylaws are not policy and bylaw staff, they're implementation in the field staff. And there's no one to be drafting these kind of bylaws, and this is what this position supports and does. And I just want to bring home again, part of the reason why this is being proposed for this position is if I don't get a manager who can look after these 5 people in this area and support others in the organization in terms of developing bylaws and different legislation, and I leave it all up to the director, it means that the director has more than 7 to 8 direct reports. And they will have managers down to coordinators, again, where they're trying to support all these different people, and you're not able to do it in a way that supports retention and workload and resilience. So that's why these 2 different positions are being proposed the way they are.
So,
I just I just want to come back to the recommendation for the Director of Community Services is actually in this being proposed to be funded in 24-25. Not looking for funding right now for that position. So this is just to, again, hold a place in the budget for that position in the future.
So this position would be, did I hear you say managing 5 people?
Yeah, that position would be responsible for overseeing 5 people.
And is that like a city clerk or whoever drafts the bylaws or the filing systems, that the
That's
people that do that now?
existing, our fight coordinators, our strategic initiatives officer. And then
who-
the administrative assistants, executive administrative assistants who are supporting mayor,
So
council.
whose responsibility are they now? Yours?
mine.
Okay. Okay. So you want to get a manager for those 5?
That's correct.
So what will that person do? Just kind of oversee what they're doing?
That person will lead. They're going to be the one-stop shop for anybody, public and media, who's coming to ask us about legislation, whether we're adhering to things, different governance. They'll be the ones who are in charge of any formalities, from the flag raisings to receiving important people. They'll be the high-level expert when it comes to our bylaws, Robert's Rules, Municipal Government Act. It would be this group.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, just trying to clarify it. Sorry, are you done?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So just want to clarify it. So you want to hire the manager for governance and legislative review, okay? But you don't want to hire the director of community services.
Not, I don't need funding for the Director of Community Services right now because
That's
I
all we-
have Sue Fraser on contract.
Right.
I'll be looking for permanent funding for that position during the 24-25 budget.
But in the budget, I thought we approved of 2 directors. Is that what we have here in the budget?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not saying a director, you're saying director and a manager, correct?
No, she's
There's going to be confusion around this.
Yeah, that's why I'm trying to
So what was approved in the budget was there would no longer be a deputy CAO.
Correct.
Okay? That deputy CAO was turning into 1 director.
No, we said 2. That's,
0.5 probably, but anyway.
yeah.
So what I had from budget, I mean, I can look at these numbers again. If this exists and I don't have to have this conversation. I will go back and check.
Yeah.
But as far as I understood the budget, I had the funding for 2 directors right now. And then I had funding for a contract for Sue Fraser. So all I'm flagging is that I will be coming back for 24-25 for the Director of Community Services.
Right.
So in this senior leadership team, so we are going to go hire the Director of Finance and Corporate Services. We'll hire for the Director of Integrated Growth. And then in the meantime, Sue Fraser will be the Interim Director of Community Services.
So you'll have your 3
And
directors.
then we'll look to make that position permanent as part of 24-25.
Again, I'm looking at this report that we paid for. I think KPMG charges about 50,000 on page 73, prioritization matrix, recommendations, consider outsourcing work that is capital intensive or hard to fill roles. So again, this manager of governance and legislative review, it's just to oversee what we're doing on our bylaws and anything that's connected to that. But you know that bylaws are legal documents. And there are many times that we amend our bylaw without any legal checkoff. And that's why we have Cox and Palmer that are the legal counsel for this city. If I was looking for someone to look at bylaws that we were planning to implement, I would have it vetted through them because that's where it should be vetted. The province and the feds, anytime they introduce new statutes, that has to be vetted through a legal system.
Pretty sure ours is.
No, we do not.
doesn't go through the-
I rarely do we.
Through the chair. So the scenario that we find ourselves in right now is we are having to go to Cox and Palmer for everything.
Right.
Drafting bylaws from scratch. And we are spending a lot more money than we maybe would need to spend if we had a manager of governance and legislative services who could at least draft these bylaws to a full draft. And then if you're having a lawyer review that for 1 or 2 hours versus spending 10 or 15 hours drafting it, then there is a savings in that.
No, practice is
Ultimately.
that we would draft it, then send it to legal. And we don't always do that.
So, thank you, through the chair. So practice is, in some cases, they're being asked to draft the whole thing from scratch.
Mostly amendments.
Some of them amendments.
Yeah. Take the short term.
Other agreements from scratch, but this is the team that would be able to start to develop these types of agreements without the lawyers having to do it completely from scratch, because they have the expertise in the Municipal Government Act and different legislation.
Okay, I just want to clarify this. So just to clarify, you want a director of finance, correct? Or corporate services?
Thank you, through the chair. So all I'm asking, my ask is not for the Director of Finance and Corporate Services. That position is funded. The position is funded for the Director of Integrated Growth, so I'm not asking for either of those two. All I'm asking and suggesting is that we have permanent funding for the Director of Community Services as part of the 24-25 budget, so not this year. And then the second ask is about this Manager of Governance and Legislative Services. Unfortunately, I had to put it out of extraordinary expenses because I don't have the full picture of what it's going to look like in terms of hiring all other people this year. So I couldn't pull from salaries and benefits because I just don't know if I have that space yet. But come the end of the year, if there's space in salaries and benefits, that position will come out of there instead of extraordinary expenses.
CAO, Eleanor, again, we've been without a DCAO for almost 2 years, and our CAO is trying to quarterback everything. You were brought in, well, then Donna Waddell was brought in as interim CAO. She was trying to quarterback as much as she could. Sue was brought in to take some of the load away from the office of CAO. Like, we know that we have to fill the position of community services and corporate services. Why don't we just fill them? And then next year, you can look at your director of integrated services, along with the manager for governance and legislative services, because your department, your office needs help. It just can't keep going on the way it is because there's too many going to you at one time. I'm just trying to make this as simple as possible. Go back to what we've been talking about for 2 years, and Emily's been around the table. Like, we want 2 directors, director of corporate service, director of community service. Boom. And go out and hire those 2 positions, and let's get moving on. And Sue Fraser stays on as interim director of integrated services. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Barr cannot stay much longer, I don't think. So what, we want him, or the next one's going to be long? Yeah. So what's the plan here now, folks? Do we just sort of defer the next ones to the next meeting, or? Because we won't have quorum for one thing.
Well, finish this off. Right now, I agree. Let's hire the 2 directors as we planned and see how that works out. And that will be, Chair Matard can set another meeting. If he wants to set it next week, whatever. He'll set that meeting up. So he
Okay.
didn't know he could cancel.
No, that's right.
And I did talk to him in the parking lot because he got the call there while we're in the parking lot for the night. Stuff's blowing up down at the province, you probably read, so they wanted it back. So, yeah, told him
Okay.
we were prepared to chair, so.
So what's the consensus that we,
Well, first of all, is there anything else pressing? Because
everything's pressing?
the employee engagement survey, I mean, I read all that, I mean, it makes sense.
Through the chair, if we need to reschedule, I'd like it if we could find a time this week. Simply because the next report deals with a department that's in very dire circumstances that I need to
Yes.
get some resolution
right.
to council.
Okay.
Is that, is,
So can Emily, maybe you can touch with Councilor Turk. As Sue Fraser said, I'm available anytime. Trying to be funny with me. But anyway,
Is that the planning and heritage structure?
Yeah.
Councilor Bernard, are you available sometime this week if the chair can sort of hook something up for the last
Well,
one or two, three items?
Frick. But I know what she's saying with planning and heritage. I know they're properly in desire, so will that take long to go over? It will?
What kind of time frame are we looking at if we just jump on that one now, planning and heritage? Well, a lot of pressure.
Can
Yes.
we meet Thursday morning?
Sewer and water, we have at
12 noon.
12, your worship.
Well, I, like Sue, took a contract, so I mean, it's not as flexible where I can come and go. So,
Yeah.
You can come and go? Is that what you said?
Sue, can you come and go?
No.
All right, I guess I can.
Any day, Sue.
CEO, could I just ask?
Yes, you go ahead, your worship.
Just some of the conversation that we had here, CAO Eleanor, could you just take that into consideration and we'll revisit it when we reconvene in a couple of days?
Thank you, Mayor. I just need you to clarify what you mean. Are you looking for me to change recommendations in these additional reports?
Two directors, corporate services, community services.
Thank you, Worship. So in my role as CAO, I'm going to insist that I really need someone for integrated growth. And I also need that finance and corporate services person. I have Sue, and we've agreed upon, with Sue's background, on contract, that her function in community services is best suited. So from the CAO's perspective, the three positions as outlined as is what the organization needs. All that's being asked with the directors is only a question of permanent funding for the community services director. That's what's being asked in this
Okay,
report.
look, if this starts the roll, guys, it's the end of our first quarter, and we've been without a DCAO for a year, 2 years. Like, we know that there's a void. Like, we know what we have to fill, so let's fill it. So if you need to fill it with a director of corporate services, great. If you need to fill it with an interim director of community services, great. And if you need integrated services, I agree with that. But let's get it going. Like, I think that we can solve a lot more issues if we had this senior management team in place and we can address these other issues of governance and legislative review. Because I think that governance and legislative review, it has an area that we can develop a lot more, much better, because who knows, we could get someone with a legal background that could take on that job, that could provide legal service. So, look, Councillor Bernard, I'm looking at Director of Corporate Services, Interim Director of Community Services, and a Director of Integrated Services?
Growth.
Integrated growth.
I think, I mean, she already has two directors. That's proved. And she has Sue under contract.
So you in favor of what she's saying?
So, and I think she's looking for that direction. I think we're saying, at least what I heard all day today was, you're saying fill those two positions. And I'm saying, yeah, well, she's already got that approved, so she can fill those two positions. And we'll take it from there. She has two, she has Sue, and she has those two. So let's fill them, see where we are then.
Understood? Good for you?
And then the funding CAO for the third one is not to 2024, did you say?
That's part of the 24-25. In terms of the manager of legislative, I can come back with that position. I'm completely fine with that. My goal really for this meeting was to introduce what the senior leadership team is going to be. So the manager of governance and legislative services, that's something that can be put on hold. We can bring back for 24-25 budget. And then we'll just see what happens with the new directors. They may be underwater for a bit simply because of the direct reports. So that will just be the outcome.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. So I guess a motion to adjourn. Oh, sorry. Well, that's up to the chair. That's not up to me.
Yeah, I'm gone. I leave here on Thursday afternoon. I'm heading over to Amherst, so.
Book it sometime after Thursday afternoon.
Oh, yeah, since he's gone, that'd be a good idea.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn? Second.
Okay,
Thank
you
you.
get all that? Thank you.